Hey guys, welcome back to Local Coma. Alright, so this video is going to be a bit of a long one. It's something I've been working on for about 5 years off and on, and thanks to the virus which must not be named, I don't really have any more excuses. I started writing down what I wanted to say and then deleted everything dozens of times over the years because it's frankly really uncomfortable for me, and it took a lot of convincing both from myself and loved ones to realize it's not something I should be ashamed of. But I was for a long time. Hi, I'm Nick, and in 2013 I received a major head injury which changed my life. This video is not meant to be an oh poor me moment. To a point it is personal therapy, but I'm also here because I'm hoping someone else will watch this and understand they're not alone, and maybe by extension my video will help them to avoid some of the problems I've had in my situation. Back in December 2013, I took a seasonal position at Brookstone, the massage chair and novelty gift store you used to see at every mall. Things get crazy during the holidays, there's a lot of stock coming in, and the back room was mismanaged by someone who thought it was smart to stack heavy boxes up to about 10 feet. There were a lot of poorly balanced things just thrown around where you couldn't even see them, and I managed to step into the right spot to get hit by one of those things when I was looking for something for a guest. I was in a confined space, a wooden box fell, slammed into my knees, and knocked me backwards into one of our shelving units. I hit both my head and spine on about 5 shelves going down, and got pinned at the bottom because the space I was standing in was only about 2 feet wide to begin with. Then, to make matters worse, one of the 10-foot stacks tried to come down on me. Thankfully, a coworker was back there with me and did manage to block the boxes before they came down, because if not, I probably would have died or at least been hurt way worse than I already was. This leads to point number 1. I'm incredibly stubborn, and I also have a very high pain tolerance. Being the incredibly smart person I am, I insisted to my boss that I was fine, and tried to go back to work, which lasted all of about 20 minutes because I could barely stand. If this happens to you, immediately go to the hospital. As a work injury, your company is supposed to pay for it anyway, and you have no idea what could happen if you choose not to. So there is no good excuse for trying to do what I originally tried to do. I got to the hospital about an hour and a half later, and after some scans, it's determined that I'm not in good shape. Shocking, I know. Once the initial adrenaline wore off, I could barely move without being in excruciating pain. I was told that I could not return to work due to the severity of my injuries, and basically put on bed rest for a while with physical and mental therapy planned for when I was up for it. The most important thing the doctor told me was do not make any major life decisions since there is no way to know yet just how thorough the damage is. I'll come back to my general symptoms in a bit, but as it turns out, it was pretty bad. I experienced heavy memory loss, especially short term, and I don't actually remember most of that year. The majority of what I do remember is not good, and that leads me to point number 2. Make sure you can trust the people in your life. When I was at the hospital, my parents were there, but so was my girlfriend of about a month. Now, my parents are good people, and I know they had my best interests at heart, and always have. That girl, though, did not, which unfortunately, I didn't figure out for a very long time. After hearing the doctor warn me about life changes, she made sure I made every single change possible, starting by moving me in with her and isolating me from my friends and family. We were engaged within the month. She had me fully convinced that my parents were out to get me and were using my condition to their advantage. You may wonder why I believed her. Beyond the brain damage, there were 2 main reasons. I was highly trusting. We tend to want to think someone is trying to help us over assuming they would lie about something so serious. And I was highly high from all of the pain meds they gave me, which she made sure I took as often as possible. Brainwashing is a lot easier when you've already incapacitated the victim. She was able to construct false memories and conversations and tell me they happened because she knew I would never remember enough to know the difference. If I questioned her, she played the victim and said she was tired of having the same conversations with me over and over again when, quote, I had already agreed with her, or told her things were a certain way. I can use the excuse that I didn't know what I was doing but I still hurt my family and very nearly destroyed our relationship based on her claims. I definitely destroyed friendships for her. Over the course of about 9 months, I became her hand puppet. People I grew up with are gone from my life because I believed her lies and then used them against the people I loved. And I can't get them back. So I'm grateful to my parents and the few people who stuck it out to see what was happening. On a side note, just because it isn't physical does not mean it is not abuse. Women abuse men too. We just don't talk about it as much. I'm gonna go ahead and cover my symptoms here because they're about to become a lot more relevant to the situation. First, the memory loss. It is still very difficult for me to remember what I'm doing at times. Why I walked into a room, what I was in the middle of writing, or even saying. This is part of why I rarely do facecam videos, since I don't have to worry as much if I can just read a script. I'm better than I was, but I still trail off at times and lose my thoughts, which used to mean long periods of silence while I tried to think of basic words. I have odd gaps in my memory where I'm not sure if something actually happened or not, and it's embarrassing because I've had to ask different friends, hey, do you remember that time that we blank? Because I'm really not sure if we did. Being manipulated by someone else made this worse, obviously, on top of just losing time. I would forget the names of good friends or relatives, people who I've known my entire life. So, to save face, I would stick to generic nicknames like Bud, Pal, etc., to avoid having to admit I wasn't sure who they were. This has thankfully improved, and while I still have some trouble, it's greatly reduced. Pain. This is barely improved. I have insane head pain, which has at times literally knocked me off my feet. This may or may not be related to a brain aneurysm, which is conveniently located at the site of my injury. I did not have this prior to the fall, and it has been suggested it was caused by it. But no one connected to Brookstone or workers' compensation is willing to go on record with that because it would be more lawsuit-worthy. My personality and emotions changed dramatically after the injury. I've always been pretty easygoing, but frustrations aside, I became much quicker to anger, lost my patience easily, and did not handle changes very well. Random things would make me cry a lot more easily, which made no sense at all. In some cases, I'd find myself strangely lacking emotion or not being sure how I should react. As uncomfortable as I could sometimes feel around other people, being alone was so much worse. If left alone with my thoughts, I started getting fixated, and many times found myself angrily arguing out loud with a memory, forgetting I wasn't in that moment anymore. Thank God that one has mostly gotten better. As far as my spine goes, I have degenerative disc disease, which is unrelated to the injury, but for about 1.5 years was exacerbated by it, in part because of the treatment they prescribed for me, which I will go over in a minute. All of that is to say, point 3. Workers' compensation is not your friend. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely good people who get into the business for the right reasons, but their primary function is to reduce company liability and cost. So while all of this was going on, I was going to doctors who were not there to do anything except save the company money. This usually entailed sending me to a pain management doctor who loaded me up on medications which made it impossible to function in my day-to-day life, rather than actually treating my conditions. The insurance company then refused to follow his advice on the rare occasions when he recommended procedures or long-term help. Only once was I sent to a mental doctor to do some testing, but all they did over the course of 6 hours was ask me the same questions repeatedly while doing spot the difference puzzles. They would occasionally send me to be inspected for medical progress, which mostly equaled checking my blood pressure and reaction time before telling me I was fine. One of the worst doctors I have ever seen in my life went over my injury paperwork with me, and upon seeing how slow my healing was going, tried to tell workers' comp I was fine on the basis of checking my vitals. He then proceeded to tell me, and I quote, "Well, you're not going to get better anyway. An injury like this is a major mental issue. You need hope to keep going. And any doctor worth anything would never say that. This guy should have lost his license right there. What's that? Oh yeah, you're right. I really should have sued Brookstone. Not that it mattered much at that point. Part of the problem, for those who don't know, is Brookstone went bankrupt shortly after this started. They've since been bought out by Spencer's. Yes, that Spencer's. And shut down just about all of their physical stores. But at that time, my healthcare was being paid for by a company which was already being bled dry. A full year after my injury, they finally set me up with physical and mental therapy. Let me say that again. A full year. After a month or two, I had to stop going because it had been long enough since my injury that even the physical therapist agreed the things that they were having me do were making my back worse. As for the mental bit, it was split between meditation tapes and what added up to high school counseling. My therapist did help some, but most of her methods were fairly unorthodox to say the least. She was fresh out of school herself, barely old enough to drink, and I think by the end of our time together, I actually knew more about her entire family and their drama than she knew about my injury. The insurance never once attempted to actually treat the physical problems with my spine or my head. They flat out refused, even when the doctors they sent me to recommended other solutions to them. So, point 4, do not let someone else control your health. Fight for it. I failed here. Like I said, they went bankrupt. And even though they knew the treatment was harming me more, they used my inability to keep going with it as an excuse to completely stop treating me. I still should have gone up the chain, gotten a lawyer, done whatever it took. At the end of the day, as is extremely apparent in 2020, your health really is all you have, and it can drastically improve or destroy the other aspects of your life. I've spent a long time since then figuring out things on my own, and came up with a few solutions to help with my memory issues, but they're not as efficient as a real doctor would have been. Now, I'm going to give you guys some alternative solutions which have worked for me, but understand that none of these are meant to be medical advice. They're just ways to make your life easier on top of going to the doctor. Some of this I already touched on earlier, but I'm going to go ahead and reiterate a few points just so that you have them all together. First, hold yourself to a regular schedule. It's far easier to remember what you're supposed to be doing if you do the same things consistently. To that end, I would recommend getting a day planner. You need to keep to as consistent a schedule as possible so your mind can get used to the pattern. You may still forget to do something, but forming specific habits will go a long way. This is also a lot easier if you live with someone else, because they can encourage and remind you if you forget something. Next, with or without a planner, take notes of important things you say, do, or plan to do. I was pretty unorganized and would use scrap paper at first, so half the time I'd lose the notes I wrote myself, which completely destroyed the purpose. If you're not going to use a book, use sticky notes and put them in places where they're highly visible and relevant. Being embarrassed to have someone you know see them is not an excuse. Anyone who knows you should already understand your situation, and hopefully if you're doing this enough, you will reach a point where you don't even need them anymore, but they are incredibly helpful. Third, and this is a big one because it goes back to my earlier statement about trust. Just be honest. Don't pretend you're fine or let your pride take the wheel. Talk to your friends and family about what you're feeling, and don't be afraid to ask them questions, just as they may have questions for you. You don't need to go to Alcoholics Anonymous style meetings, but it's extremely helpful to have a support group of some kind. The more open you are with them, the easier it is to get help. I let myself be isolated by my ex, and while my parents and a couple of friends eventually got through to me, I tried too hard to pretend things were fine when they clearly weren't. I'm not saying go look for pity, but if something doesn't add up, say it. You can't go around losing hours out of your day, not being sure how you got wherever or whenever you are, and then laugh it off. Sure, it's still good to have a sense of humor about the situation, but no matter what degree of damage you have, it's a serious issue. and people won't know what to think if you say you're totally fine. Now, don't go too far off in the other direction either. Don't start using your condition as an excuse to get out of situations or pretend you're worse off than you are. God forbid you actually do start having more problems later. It's only going to make it harder for people around you to judge if you're getting worse. The fourth solution is a bit more fun. Stay entertained. Read a book. Sing a song. Write your own. Have conversations with other humans. Ideally, do all of these things out loud. It helps keep your mind active, helps your vocabulary improve, and forces your mind to keep up as well as it can. YouTube is also a fantastic outlet for this, because you'll have a visible record of your improvement, and that will encourage you in turn. This may not work for everyone, but therapy animals are also a thing. I have terrible allergies, but for a while I still had pets during the start of my situation. Even if you can't work at the time, having someone or something to take care of goes a long way in self-healing and fighting the depression you may encounter. I wasn't able to work for a good while, and taking care of my pets kept me on a schedule and made me feel a lot less alone. If you like alcohol, you're not going to like this one, but reduce your intake. I was never a heavy drinker. I do like a good whiskey, but I also like having control of my senses. Between my headaches and disorientation, I'm not a big fan of anything that can set off my conditions, and there is plenty of medical evidence that alcohol and brain damage do not mix well. Basically, alcohol, recreational drugs, anything that's not medically necessary and alters your perception is only going to make you feel worse in the long run. You can still have a drink from time to time, unless, of course, if your doctor says otherwise. Just be careful. This last one may seem odd at first glance, but regarding the loss of memories and people, I recommend scrapbooking or something similar. Am I keeping FBI levels of information on my loved ones? Of course! I'm engaged now to a wonderful woman, and I had a custom journal made with some of my favorite photos of her on the cover, along with important dates and memories inside. You don't have to have a head injury for this to be helpful. I know plenty of guys who would have lived a lot longer if they just had a solid record of their girlfriend's birthday. For those of us who do have memory loss, though, it's a godsend having a book that can jog my memory if it gets a bit fuzzy. If there are any developers watching, by the way, I'd love to talk to you about turning these things into an app format. I need room on my shelves for other books too, please. That's pretty much all I've got for this one. I really hope I was able to help some of you. This was the most difficult video I've ever made because it is such a personal topic, but I needed to do it. For the people watching who are currently experiencing the same things that I did, the best advice I can possibly give anyone is this. Love yourself. You didn't make this situation. It happened to you. There is no shame in this. If I can answer questions for anyone, whether you're going through it or maybe you're a caregiver, feel free to leave them in the comments section below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Until then, thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you later.